What's up, everybody? So I've finally begun digging into The First Law by Joe Abercrombie. And this is obviously in the aftermath of me just finishing Malazan Book of the Fallen. And I very much have been experiencing a Malazan hangover. And a lot of people kind of described the hangover that Malazan will give you. And I didn't know what to expect, but I have 100% been feeling it throughout this past 2 weeks after finishing the series. But I just wanted to keep plowing ahead and start a new book series so that I could just stay in the habit and keep on moving. So I decided to read The First Law because I've just seen so many videos about how good the series is supposed to be, so I was very interested to see where it goes. So this video is just going to be a quick first impressions of the series. I'm a little bit more than halfway through the first book at this moment in time, so obviously not enough to give a full reaction to the book, which I will do at a later point, but I just kind of wanted to come in and give my initial thoughts on where things are at, because I do have some thoughts. At first, when the book started, I was a little apprehensive. I don't want to say that it felt basic, but that was my first impression within the first chapter. I will say the action scene that happens right at the beginning is very good, but other than that, I just thought that, I mean, I hate to keep saying it, but coming from Malazan, the dialogue and the explanations of the locations, all these various different things, it just felt a little bit too one-dimensional for me at first. But as I started to get farther into the book and get more used to Abercrombie's writing style, I started to enjoy it more and more. And I will say, after being a little bit more than halfway through the book, I definitely feel like I'm hooked and looking forward to getting to the ending to see what happens. As I was reading the first couple chapters of The First Law, I was a little bit apprehensive. I had heard so many good things about the series, so I knew that I needed to push through. But yeah, I will say at first I was a little bit worried about if I was even going to like this. Also, I should say before we get too far into the video, there will be some minor spoilers about the book. Nothing too crazy by any means, but I'm just going to talk about some characters and a couple different scenes that happen. So if you don't want any spoilers, feel free to check out after the spoiler-free reaction. So this first few chapters introduce us to our main characters, which are Logan Ninefingers, who is this rugged barbarian from the north. Then we have Inquisitor 𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍, who was a former soldier now turned interrogator, who's been incredibly disfigured after experiencing some terrible torture himself while being imprisoned by some enemy force for several years. Then we have nobleman Captain 𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔 Luther, who is this incredibly selfish young man who is training for a duel that is coming in several months. Lastly, we have Baez, who is the first Magi. I think he's supposed to be like the most powerful sorcerer in this particular world that we know of currently. And he appears to be guiding Logan and maybe the other characters through the coming adventure, but I haven't quite gotten that far yet in the story, so we'll see where that pans out. So yeah, I will say, after digging into the first 100 pages and initially being apprehensive, I really did enjoy Abercrombie's quick-witted dialogue and the visceral action scenes that he has throughout the book. He really does have an eye for cinematic action scenes, and I've heard that in other people's reviews, so I was kind of expecting that. Once I got used to the writing style, I could clearly picture each of these action scenes in my mind, whether it was Logan fighting barbarians in the north, or 𝒊𝒊 and I believe his name is Captain West, and the guy who's training 𝒊𝒊, I forget his name currently, but there's all these like little moments where they're having duels in preparation for 𝒊𝒊's duel, which is coming up. But those are all very cinematic sequences, which I felt were written really well. So now that I'm roughly 280 pages into the book, don't really have the same critiques that I did at the beginning. I generally feel hooked into the story, and there's also a couple new characters that have begun to be introduced in this second half of the book that I'm really curious where they're going to go in the story. The way that they're being brought in makes them feel like another key player. I'll have to see how they end up interacting with our main characters that I've already come to know. So yeah, curious to see how that will happen. I'm just going to quickly mention a few scenes that have really stuck out in my mind so far. Number one being the first fight that Logan has with the Shenka in the north, in that very intro sequence where he falls off the cliff and has to fight them on his own and then get back to his campsite, all that good stuff. I thought that was a really good cinematic sequence. I particularly like the scene where Logan picks up the apprentice Magi that came to find him on behalf of Baez. He like picks him up after the apprentice falls ill and can't travel any further. And I believe they're within a day or two walking distance from Baez's tower. And there's kind of this moment where Logan has a choice to either leave him to die or to pick him up and carry him. And the way that Abercrombie writes it, it makes it seem like Logan's just going to leave this guy there to die. And I kind of just expected that was the way it was going to go based on how Logan had been described so far. But then he kind of decides to pick him up and carry him on his back for the rest of the journey. And I thought that was a nice little twist because I wasn't really expecting that to happen. I thought Baez's meeting with 𝒏𝒊𝒏 was great. A really good scene where we get to actually see Baez kind of use his power for the first time. And you get the sense that he is very respected and also very feared by other powerful characters in this world. So I'm curious to see how much more of that gets exposed in this first book. Then we have the open council meeting that happened with the messengers from the north. It's about halfway through the book. You have these messengers from the north that come to the capital city. I believe it's called 𝒂𝒊𝒏, but that could be the name of something else. But I believe it's called 𝒂𝒂𝒏. I'm going to check it after I record the video just to see if I can remembered it correctly. But yeah, these messengers come and kind of deliver a message to the king that, hey, this army from the north is coming, led by 𝒏𝒊𝒏, the king of the north. And that sounds very Game of Thronesy. Are there kings of the north in the first law and in Game of Thrones? I suppose so. Sounds like I guess that's just a fantasy trope, huh? But yeah, these messengers from the north come down and they deliver a message to the king that this army is coming. The council and the king don't seem to take it very seriously at first until there's a certain message that is conveyed a little bit later on in the book. And then it becomes very apparent that the threat is quite real. I thought 𝒂𝒊𝒏's introductory torture sequence was very interesting, to say the least. It's definitely your introduction to the grim, dark nature of the book series, but I found it intriguing in a sick kind of way. I definitely, I don't enjoy the character, but the way that 𝒂𝒊𝒏 is introduced and you're given kind of his backstory of how he was tortured and that's how he's become disfigured and has this kind of like miserable life driven by pain, that in a way kind of makes me forgive him for some of the terrible things he does. Not forgive him, but maybe understand him a little bit more. Yeah, I definitely don't want to come across as saying I like his character, but I will say he presents some interesting things to consider throughout this first portion of the book. And then the last thing that I'm going to mention is this little speech that 𝒂𝒊𝒏 gives to 𝑧𝒊𝒏. And 𝑧𝒊𝒏 throughout the book has not been very excited to prepare for this duel that he has in several months. If anything, he's like dreading it based on the way that he comes across. And as somebody who trains for jiu-jitsu matches a couple times a year, I kind of get what he's going through. There's this combination of like anxiety and excitement that is constantly in flux leading up to a match like that, and you can really see that going on in 𝑧𝒊𝒏, but 𝑧𝒊𝒏 is definitely being defeated by the anxiety in the beginning of this book. But anyway, 𝒂𝒊𝒏, I guess, has some experience in dueling and gives him this speech, which is kind of presented in a cruel way. He basically just tells him to man up and suck it up, which I kind of appreciate, to be honest, because I respond well to feedback feedback that's very direct and blunt. And 𝒂𝒏𝒏 basically tells him like, hey, if you don't want to amount to anything in life, give up, Nobody's going to blame you for it. We all kind of expect it, to be honest. You might as well just, give up now, and then you don't have to experience the embarrassment of competing and losing. But then he kind of presents another option or you can act like you really care about this and put in the work that's necessary in order to do well in your upcoming competition. And yeah, I thought it was an interesting scene because it's just not something I expected to come out of 𝒂𝒊𝒏 at that point in the book, and makes me curious about how his character is going to develop further. As he's giving that speech, he doesn't come across as a very caring character at first, but I felt like sometimes when you deliver brutal, honest feedback, that is the most caring thing you can do, in a way. Anyway, those are my thoughts on it. All right, here are a couple final predictions I have for the second half of the book. So, 𝑧𝒊𝒏. I have pretty much hated this character for the entire first half of the book. He is selfish, immature, and ungrateful. I imagine that all of this is intentional, and in the back half of the book, he's going to do something that's going to get me to like him. And I can already kind of see a little bit of a character turn going on midway through the book. But yeah, I imagine there's going to be some sort of momentous scene where my opinion of him changes. Inquisitor 𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒍. Now, this character has been entirely ruthless through the first half of the book, besides that one moment where he gives the pep talk to 𝒊𝒏𝒊𝒏. I don't think that he's going to necessarily become a good character or a benign character with good intentions, but I do think that maybe in the second half of the book, we're going to see a moment where his humanity takes over and he delivers some sort of mercy to one of his prisoners or to somebody that he has power over. Logan Ninefingers. So throughout the beginning of the book, there's all of these kind of whispers and rumors and stories about his past deeds, right? You know, he's made up to be this very infamous character who's done all of these terrible things, and he seems to be kind of ashamed of some of the things that he's done. But we haven't really seen anything too crazy up until this point. So I feel like this is kind of a given, but I'm expecting that there's going to be a scene in the back half of the book where we get to really see why Logan Ninefingers has all of this hype around him, I guess. I assume it's going to be a dark scene where we see him kill a bunch of people, but yeah, that's just kind of what I'm expecting at this point. I'm also going to predict that Logan will become somewhat of a role model for 𝒊𝒏𝒊 in the war to come. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to happen, but just the way that things are panning out, I imagine they're going to have to work together at some point, and 𝒊𝒏𝒊's going to be super unexcited by the fact that he is having to team up with this barbarian scum. But he'll see that Logan might be relatively stupid when it comes to like civilized things in the city, but is probably much more experienced and accomplished than 𝒊𝒏𝒊 when it comes to combat warfare and all things that have to do with, you know, being in the wilderness and leading a successful military campaign. Baez, honestly, I'm not entirely sure about this character just yet. He seems to be a trustworthy, good force in the book. He seems to be the mastermind of the book so far. It seems like he's aware of what's going on in this world more so than the other characters. And I assume that he is going to be the linchpin for the good guys in this book. The shaved knuckle in the hole, as 𝒂𝒊𝒏𝒏 would say. I just imagine that he's going to be the mastermind that kind of pulls all of these disparate parties together in order to achieve victory at the end of the book. So wrapping things up, I can really see why readers vouch for Abercrombie. I'm definitely enjoying the book now after initially being unsure of whether or not I was going to like it. I guess I'm just looking forward to seeing where the rest of the journey takes me. I'll have a full review once I finish the book. And if you have any comments or questions, drop them in the comments down below. Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed this, and maybe subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.